Good day, everyone. Welcome back to the Doc of Detox show. I'm your host, Dr. Darrell Wolfe, and today's show is Cancer Incorporated with Ralph Moss, PhD. Dr. Ralph W. Moss, PhD, has written and edited 12 books and 4 film documentaries on questions relating to cancer research and treatment. Dr. Moss is a graduate of the New York University 1965 and Stanford University in 1974. He is the former science writer and assistant director of public affairs at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. Since leaving Sloan Kettering in 1977, Dr. Ralph Moss has become one of the leaders when it comes to bringing the truth out about pharmaceutical corporations and cancer. Now, before we bring him on the show, I'd like to play this little video for you. So here we go. So why is it that people find it so hard to actually take the truth in? Why is it that people can be fooled, schooled, and ruled? I'll tell you why. Because people do not understand that it's all about programming. And tell me, when it comes to programming, only 6 corporations, own 95% of the media. And don't tell me we're not programmed. Take a look at our healthcare today. Take a look at how 92% of the population has an autoimmune disease. 1 out of 2 will get cancer. 1 out of 2 will experience heart disease. And look at how many people have adult onset diabetes. So this pain train is moving faster and faster. So to shed a little light on the truth, which I hope that it won't be a hard pill to swallow, I'm going to bring on right now Dr. Ralph Moss. Good day, sir.
Hi.
How are you, sir?
All right. I'm very well. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. It's such a pleasure to have you on here. And everybody, when I say it's such a pleasure, it's very difficult in the environment we have today to find somebody so dedicated to actually getting in there and bringing the truth out. And actually, with your new book, sir, can you tell everybody, before we even get going here, where they can get your new book, what it's called, and you've even offered them the PDF free, right?
That's correct. So they can get it at my website, mossreports.com/cancer incorporated. And you don't even have to spell out the incorporated. You can just do mossreports.com/cancer inc.
Excellent, sir. Thank you so much. And
you're right. The PDF is free for anybody who wants it, and there's a slight charge for the paperback version.
Thank you, sir.
But you don't have to order the paperback. You can just take the PDF as a gift.
There it is. I always tell everyone, find your gift and then gift the world. Well, I guess that's exactly what you're doing, sir. So everybody, don't forget, this is a live show, and you can send your questions in on Facebook. Type them in. Go to YouTube or go to our intercom on our website, and we're going to answer the live questions first, So let's get started here, all right? And we're going to start off with the questions that are been sent in this week. So are you ready, sir?
I sure am.
Thank you, sir. Ella from Facebook. You wrote The Cancer Industry in 1980. Has a lot changed since then?
Amazing amount. When I wrote The Cancer Industry, the industry was sort of like a shack compared to a skyscraper today. So this has become $120 billion business, billion with a B. It's 10% of the overall pharmaceutical market, which is $1.2 trillion. And the industry is dominated by a very few monopolistic firms. So actually, as of this year, there are 9 companies that basically control the cancer drug business worldwide. About half of those are American companies like Bristol Myers Squibb, Merck, and Pfizer are they're really the dominant players. But it's the other big change, something that I didn't even glimpse in 1980, was that the big pharma, the big pharmaceutical companies have basically corrupted the entire oncology profession, or the leadership, let's say, of the oncology profession. This was something that I really had no inkling of 40 years ago, and it's now become just a glaring fact of life.
Thank you so much. This is just in from Debbie from Facebook. She says, if we vote the government in, why doesn't the government protect us? Why are they allowing all of this to happen? And why is there nothing being done in the way of natural health? Why is that? There you go.
So the government at the federal level, the Congress, is besieged by pharmaceutical representatives and lobbyists. And there's approximately 1,300 or to 1,400 lobbyists of the drug industry creeping around the Congress at any one time. So you've got about 3 lobbyists for every congressperson. And they're not just there to give advice, they're coming with money. You could say suitcases of money. Money for that's gifts disguised as re-election campaign funds, as well as the power of the industry as a whole, represented by the trade organization, which is actually named Pharma. It's the name of their trade organization. And so that's the big thing, that as long as we have a structure of government where corporations can act like people, and rich people at that, and as well as wealthy investors in these companies being able to make, unlimited gifts basically to super PACs and so forth, you've got an impossible situation. This is what has to change fundamentally, that as long as money has such a powerful voice within the political system, all of our proposed reforms, and I have about, I think, 17 proposed reforms at the end of Cancer Incorporated, but these are just debating points. Until we do something to eliminate the influence of corporate money on the political leaders, I don't think we're going to have any fundamental change. So it's all about the taking down, the bribery, the control of the Congress by these corporate interests. The question about the alternatives, something I've thought about for 45 years. I've been thinking hard about this topic, but it's related to this. I don't see any sign of an actual conspiracy against the alternative treatments, but the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, has approved over the years, I think I counted 555 drugs used in the treatment of cancer. And as far as I know, not a single one of those has ever been a natural, non-patented, inexpensive drug. It kind of is impossible in the current situation, the way the laws are written and the way the system has been set up. It costs between 650 million and somewhere between 650 million and $2.4 billion for each drug that is actually approved, if you prorate the cost of, all the costs of the drug company. So the drug industry insists that it costs them $2.5 billion. The critics of the drug industry say it's only 650 million. But let's say you have a good treatment for a disease. Let's just say we'll call that treatment vitamin C, for instance. Vitamin C sells for pennies, and modern day cancer drugs sell upwards of $150,000 per patient per year. And that's just the beginning, because in fact, some patients are paying in the millions of dollars for cancer treatments, or certainly over $1 million for cancer treatment. And so the only way that the drug company can earn back the money that they invest for these drugs is by charging, high amounts for them. Now, that's not to say that there isn't price gouging going on. The most expensive cancer drug in the market right now is Kymriah. It's a kind of CAR T cell therapy. I won't go into the details of that, but that's the category that it's in. And the charge for that is $475,000 per infusion. And just let that sink in for a minute. $475,000 for one injection of the drug. And the man who invented that drug, is a professor at University of Pennsylvania, has said that the actual cost of producing it is $20,000. So, all right, $20,000 is still a lot of money, but they are taking a markup. 95% of the cost of the drug goes into the pocket of the drug company. Just $20,000 for the cost of development. The rest of it is basically profit to be used for, for their inflated salaries of their executives and for the shareholders, and to cover their advertising costs and the cost of bribing the medical profession. So, they have costs, all right, but some of those costs are ill-gotten gain, because it doesn't add to the welfare of the patients or of society to have a $475,000 drug. They could make a nice profit if they would just charge double, let's say, of what the drug actually costs them. This is the most extreme example. Most drugs don't cost anything like that. But because of the nature of this drug, yes, there is substantial cost involved. But they went from a $20,000 cost to a $475,000 price tag. So no other industry is like that. It looks more like a mafia operation than it does actually like an actual legitimate business.
Thank you, sir. Martin from Intercom just sent this in, and he says, how can this even happen? I was told that a pharma can make $1 billion on a product, and they know they're only going to get fined a few million. So there's never any lesson here.
Yes. In other words, if they do something illegal, they don't go to jail. They don't face serious consequences. After a company could make, with no exaggeration, they can make $100 million a month off of these drugs. And so if the government slaps them after years of litigation, if they slap them with a $1 billion fine, it still would make no difference, because they could have gone on for 8 or 9 years with these ill-gotten gains and then face a fine. Maybe they would take back 1 year's worth of profit, but they still have that 8 or 9 years of excess money coming in that they were not entitled to. And it goes way beyond that, because in fact, most of the new cancer drugs have never been proven to be effective. So you say, how can this be? I mean, FDA exists, right, in order to judge the safety, to guarantee the safety and efficacy or effectiveness of new drugs. I mean, that's their main, in terms of the drug portion of Food and Drug, that's their main charge, right? But in fact, over the years, and it started with Ronald Reagan in 1980, but over the last 40 years, let's say, the once very high standards of FDA vis-a-vis safeguarding the public were whittled down and whittled down and whittled down, and it always came down to loosening the standards by which we judge whether or not a drug is effective. So basically what this means is that for a drug to be effective in the cancer field, it has to do one of, or more than one, several of three things. The first thing, of course, would be if it would cure cancer. There are very few drugs that actually do cure advanced cancer. We're talking here about treatment of advanced stage cancer, which is a common situation. So the next thing is it could meaningfully, or what they call statistically significantly, extend life, extend survival. And the third thing would be if it could at least maintain, or even better yet, improve quality of life. In the last few years, the FDA hasn't approved any drugs based upon its effect on quality of life. So we can put that one aside. But when it comes to, and it's very rare to say that a drug actually cures advanced cancer. So what it comes down to is, does it improve survival? That's the thing that gets argued over within the advisory committees of the FDA and so forth. Well, a lot of these drugs marginally improve survival, but it isn't survival in the sense that you or I would understand the word survival. To us, as to the dictionary, survival means living longer. So when you hear that the drug actually increases survival, you think, well, that's good. It's probably worth paying something extra to get a year, 2 or 3 years of living longer. But the majority of drugs, of cancer drugs, are never proven to actually make you live longer. What they do is they use kind of a funny language where they distort the meaning of the word survival, and they're talking actually about something called progression-free survival. There's actually 12 different definitions of the word survival in the National Cancer Institute Dictionary of Cancer, and only one of them is actually real overall increased overall survival. The other definitions of survival are basically weasel words. They're fudged to make it look like the drug is actually improving the patient's lifespan, but they don't really do that. The drugs increase a period of time before the cancer is judged to have progressed. That's called progression-free survival. But it's very easy to understand that you could increase progression-free survival and not actually increase survival. For instance, if you took two people, both of whom, one starts on a new drug at day one, and the other one just gets the standard treatment or no treatment on the same day. Now, at the 3-month point, the patient has no increased progression of the disease, the first patient. And then at the 6-month point, they see that the disease is progressing again. And then the patient dies at the 1-year anniversary. So now and then the other patient does nothing changes in terms of progression. The other patient just goes downhill steadily and also dies on the 1-year anniversary of starting the treatment. So the first patient is entered into the record books as having had a 6-month increased progression-free survival. But he died on the same 1-year anniversary, I'm saying by, just for the sake of comparison, with the second patient who had no increased survival. And by the way they keep these records, they record the date that the progression started from the date that the patient is examined. So in this case, the patient was examined on the 6-month anniversary, and the disease now was progressing again. So they can get approval of the first drug based upon the fact that it increased progression-free survival by 6 months. If you have that same situation with the other patients in the trial, whereas the second drug, no, that's a failure because it didn't do anything. But the patient's life was not necessarily improved by taking that first drug. It certainly wasn't improved in terms of how long they lived. So this is the games that they play to squeeze something positive out of a study that basically didn't show any actual improvement in the lifespan of the patient. And yet there's a $120 billion industry riding on these kinds of tricks. And that's part of what I cover in Cancer Incorporated.
Thank you, sir. So I have one here from Susie, and she says, two of my best friends took their little girl and ran to Mexico because their child was going to be forced to do chemo. How can that happen in our country?
Well, that's a more difficult situation because there are some kinds of childhood cancer that are curable through chemotherapy, especially the acute lymphoblastic leukemia, where there's about a 65% 5-year survival in the patients, in the children getting that treatment. So this becomes a matter of, let's say, debate between the parents' rights over the fate of the child and the state's rights to make sure that children are not abused by having curative treatments that they can't decide on. So the state acts in loco parentis. I mean, it's shocking to most people that that they can do this, and they abuse it too. We saw this in many cases that the state will abuse this authority, but I don't think that we allow parents to do anything in regard to their children, or else you'd have children, as we had up here in Maine this past year, who child was disciplined by the parents, the foster father and the mother, and froze to death. So I don't think we would say that the parents can do anything they want vis-a-vis the children, but it's a bit of a more complicated situation because of the fact that some children will be cured of leukemia if they do take the standard treatment.
Thank you, sir. Shane from Facebook, don't researchers need to take money from drug companies in order to do research?
Right. So I think what Shane's referring to is the fact that in Cancer Incorporated, I take on the leaders of oncology who are taking personal money, general funds, general money, for working for drug companies as advisors, or take what they call honoraria, which are basically just money in the pocket. Okay, and so they also take money of a research money to do studies at their hospitals and their universities, which is necessary because the budget of the National Cancer Institute doesn't cover the cost of developing all the new drugs. Instead, the drug companies pay for the studies that are done most of the time. Now, that itself introduces an element of prejudice on the part of the researchers, because when you get your laboratory is your life, basically, as a scientist. So if you're getting your funding from a drug company, you're going to do everything possible to please that company. But an argument could be made that this is the system under which we live. And so what are we supposed to do? We want to do our studies. We need to do our studies. So we take the money from the drug companies, and everybody does pretty much, because how else are we going to do our research? And I think that's what Shane was referring to. But what I'm talking about mainly in Cancer Incorporated is the fact that numerous leaders of oncology are taking general money, by which I mean money in the pocket, money to send their kids to a private college, money to buy a yacht or a second or a third home, just simply for being a friend of the company. And what does it mean to be a friend of the company? Well, it means when the time comes for the study of that company's drug to be written up, the researchers are going to be very friendly towards that drug and that company. They're going to come up where they're going to give it a positive spin, give a preferential treatment to that drug and that company. So I think we see across the board a bribery of oncology by the drug companies that's more than just paying for the research. This is actually straight out bribes. And I say in the book that I served, I did jury duty this summer in the Superior Court of the county where I live, and the judge spent 6 hours grilling us in terms of any possible source of prejudice that we might have vis-a-vis the defendants in the different criminal cases that we were going to judge, and he even bounced or dismissed a juror because she babysat for one of the defendants 25 years before, hadn't seen him since then, but just based upon a 25-year-old association with him as a little kid, the judge said, no, you're excused from the panel. And that struck me because simultaneously I was researching Cancer Incorporated and thinking, here are people taking, in some cases, millions of dollars from drug companies. So why do we have a lower standard for a drug for a scientist or a doctor who's judging in a clinical trial the effectiveness of a drug that's going to impact our lives, our decision making about what treatments we're going to agree to, and going to impact the whole medical field, because the way they spin the results can make people think the drugs are much more effective than they really are, that we're okay with as a society. In fact, the government publishes the data that I'm referring to, the amount to the penny we know, because they hold the drug companies responsible for telling them how much money they gave to every doctor in America. It's shocking. I mean, when you actually get into this open payment data, it's not hard to find. It's just hiding in plain sight on the internet. And you see this wide-scale bribery going on. But in a court case where somebody's facing 6 months in jail for robbery, stealing a TV or something, oh, well, then we're all up in arms, make sure that the babysitter doesn't get to be on the jury. But when it comes to the most consequential medical decisions, what kind of cancer treatment, what the government's going to have to pay in billions of dollars through Medicare and Medicaid, then we treat it like nothing. It's like they're doing things right in front of our faces that are so outrageous that I just think if the world would know about this, then it would have to change, because I don't think that the oncology profession is ready to stand up to the wrath of the patient population when the patients understand that they're being sold a bill of goods, that the drugs that we're told are safe and effective in many, many cases have never been proven to be so.
Wow. We just got this in, James from Facebook. Don't drug companies have to prove that drugs work to get FDA approval?
Right. Well, this is part of the same game. What does it mean to work? Everybody thinks that work means, if they think about it, that it's going to increase their life, their overall survival. It's rare to show that a drug actually increases overall survival. And when they do, people would be very surprised to know that on average, in stage 4 cancer, these new drugs extend survival by between 3 and 4 months. That's basically, those are the effective ones. We won't even talk about the drugs that actually don't increase survival, just increase this phony measure of progression-free survival. But the actual benefit is, I think it's 3.4 months on average. And Jim Allison, who won the Nobel Prize in 2018, he actually alluded to this in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech. He said, what we're looking at now is you find some target on the cancer cell, you come up with a drug to attack that target, and if you move the arrow or the survival curve over by a few months, you're lucky. So he even in the Nobel Prize acceptance, he basically gave the game away, because there's a study that shows that people even getting old-fashioned chemotherapy for stage 4 cancer, lung cancer or colon cancer, believe that the drugs are going to cure them. I think it was like 69% of the lung cancer patients think that they're getting the chemo to cure their cancer. And in fact, the doctor has no such expectation whatsoever. I mean, the doctor's not lying to them, but the doctor's allowing them to go along with the illusion, whether it's done because out of compassion, because they don't want to, they want to let them down easy, or because they want to make it seem as if their treatments are more effective than they actually are. But the situation is actually pretty dire, and it gave me pause, because I never wrote a book like this before, and I've written more than 12 books and edited other books all on cancer. I never had a situation where I hesitated to actually finish the book or publish the book. And the reason for that was because I thought, the same way the doctor is thinking, I don't want to destroy people's hope. I do want them to feel hopeful, and in the book I give some reasons to be hopeful about the future. But on the other hand, there are times when you have to take a hard look at the reality, both as individuals and as a society. So in a way, this is a wake-up call for society. But the book, I think cancer patients should read the book if they're up to doing that. I definitely feel that the caregivers should read the book, both caregivers in the sense of family members and friends and loved ones who are aiding in the decision-making, but also the caregivers, the professional caregivers, the doctors and the nurses and the other people involved in the care of the cancer patient, because I don't see, unless we have a clear-eyed view of what the cancer drug business is all about and what these drugs actually do, without sentimentality, without being swayed by emotion, but really trying to get at the baseline of what these drugs do and cannot do, then I don't see how we can make good decisions. And I feel it's absolutely incumbent on the oncology profession to basically give us unprejudiced information about the drugs that's not swayed by the money that's flowing to them in various ways from boosting and promoting these drugs. Once the public understands to what extent the oncology profession has been corrupted, or at least the leadership has been corrupted, then how do they expect us to put any faith in the statements they make about the effectiveness of these drugs? And that opens the door, by the way, to fraudulent treatments. That's where the opening is, because if people lose faith in the honesty of the standard profession, then of course they are looking elsewhere. They're gonna, at that point they have woken up to the real situation, but that doesn't mean that everything that poses as an alternative is necessarily honest or real. So they're creating their own nemesis in a way.
Thank you, sir. Karen from Facebook, it just came in. I thought that precision medicine was on the verge of curing cancer.
Excuse me. So, precision medicine is the name that has been given to the process of identifying a mutation within a cancer cell and devising a drug, like a little guided missile, to go attack, block, explode, whatever that marker on the cancer cell, either block it or else poison it or destroy it. And presumably by doing that, you will be able then to destroy the cancer. The basic premise behind that is the idea that you see repeated everywhere on the internet and in books. Cancer is a genetic disease. So this has become so repeated so often that it's just considered, if you don't believe that, you're considered to be a complete idiot. You don't know anything at all about it. And then this was embedded in the precision medicine initiative and the cancer moonshot and these other programs that mostly came out from the Obama administration in 2015, 2016, the Beau Biden Cancer Initiative and so forth, that these were programs predicated on the idea that you could end cancer
by
finding the mutation and targeting the mutation. The problem is, and there's numerous problems with this, but the basic problem is that there are hundreds of mutations within cancer. Some people say thousands of mutations within cancer. And if you get lucky, maybe if you have a single mutation within the cancer, maybe you could target that mutation and maybe take down that cancer, or at least for a while. But those cancers, the ones that have like a single mutation, at best represent about 1/4 of all the cancers, and 3/4 of them have multiple mutations. So then you would need multiple drugs to target the multiple mutations. All of these drugs have side effects. I can't hardly think of a cancer drug that doesn't have side effects. And so you have the prospect now, if you have 4 mutations within your cancer, you're going to have to apply 4 drugs to that cancer. Well, there's a problem, because at this point, each drug is about $150,000 per patient. 4 drugs are going to get you into the realm of like $500,000. The drugs are toxic. You really can't give 4 drugs, because you'd probably seriously damage or kill the patient when you try to do that. And it basically doesn't work. And this is a very, very important point, that even when it's been tried, like there are several initiatives, and I talk about them in Cancer Incorporated, to, let's say, not worry too much about where the cancer is occurring, but just find the mutational signature, the genetic or genomic signature of the cancer, and apply the drug or drugs that target those mutations. Well, this has been tried. There is something called the I-SPY trial. There's also the NCI Match trial, which is an enormous enterprise coming from National Cancer Institute. And as I go into detail on these in the book, these basically don't work. It just hasn't worked. And it doesn't surprise me, because I don't really believe cancer is a genetic disease. So it wasn't at all surprising to me. So if it's not a genetic disease, then what is it? And there is an alternate theory. There's more than one alternate theory, but the one that has gained the most traction in recent years is the metabolic theory. Cancer may be a metabolic disease. So what does that mean? It means that the cancer is occurring at the level of the energy generation system within the cell, and then that makes the genes go crazy. That's an entirely different picture of cancer than the standard picture. But I think there's a lot to be said for that, and I do have a chapter on that in Cancer Incorporated.
Thank you so much, sir. So, Tom from Intercom, don't doctors have to disclose their ties to drug companies?
I think it's the other way around. I think the drug companies have to disclose their ties to American doctors, American medical doctors.
Okay.
The PhDs sort of exempted. And there is a website called openpaymentdata.gov. I may not have that exactly right, but it's in my book, Cancer Incorporated. But it is a function of the Department of Health and Human Services, and it's a part of the law, part of the Sunshine Act that was enacted by President Obama, and it basically requires the drug companies to declare to the penny how much money that they're actually giving the doctors. Now, we know the doctors themselves are supposed, within the context of publication, it depends on the rules of the journal that they're publishing in, but some journals require them to also declare at least the names of the companies that they're receiving compensation from. But we know from a number of examples that they're not doing this completely. And some of them are denying having any links, any conflict at all, because of just trying to hide the fact. But you can't do that anymore, because as far as I know, the drug companies are all in compliance. That's as far as I have never heard anybody say that the drug companies were hiding their links to the doctors. But you can see in the disclosure statements of some doctors, they're not including what we can see with our own eyes is going on at the government website. So they're not always completely honest in the way they declare in journals, and not all journals require them to declare. So you have examples like the chief of staff, physician in chief of Memorial Sloan Kettering, my old alma mater, who was caught basically preaching how everybody should be completely transparent in terms of their relationship with the drug industry, and then himself was found to have taken more than $3 million from drug companies whose products he was helping to evaluate. So this was a big scandal that actually made it onto the front page of the New York Times. Most of these things go unremarked, and it's become so common that I think most oncologists just don't look on it as anything exceptional, that the leadership, the first author, second author, and final author, especially of these important clinical trial papers, are just taking pocket money that could run into, as I said, over $3 million in some cases, depending on how highly positioned the person is. But the short answer is no, they don't have to. They can get around making that disclosure, or can give a very incomplete disclosure, or hide it in some out-of-the-way nook and cranny. I mean, amazing ingenuity spent in keeping that information out of the hands of the public. So it was a great pleasure for me to actually bring this out into the light of day. The Sunshine Act, the well-named Sunshine Act, the purpose of which was to shine sunlight onto these sort of underhanded dealings that are going on. And that's part of the reason I wrote the book, was because I wanted the public, the patient population, and the relatives, which constitutes 2/3 of the American public, I wanted them to know what's going on so that they could then bring pressure on the oncologists, who then bring pressure on the leadership to change this, because there really should be a pledge at some point of the oncologist not to take any money from the drug industry, period. I mean, that should be enacted in law, but even before it gets enacted in law, there should be such a public uproar about this that basically they stop spinning the results of worthless drugs in favor of the drug industry. Now, maybe that's utopian, but I think if there was sufficient public pressure, this could happen.
Thank you very much. So everybody, don't forget that we've stated it before in the last show, but Dr. Ralph Moss and myself will be lecturing in Markham, Ontario, April 30th. And I think we'll be there from April 30th to the 4th. I'll be doing, Dr. Ralph Moss will be doing a couple lectures. I'll be doing 4 lectures. Take a look on my events page on docofdetox.com. Click on the events and you'll see. And you can still get tickets, okay, for $97, and they're almost $300 a ticket for these 4 days events. There's not just us two that are going to be there. There's some of the most amazing lectures, and it's called the Legends of Health Conference in Markham, Ontario. All right. And also, sir, do you mind telling everybody where they can get your book again and the PDF, and then we'll go on to the next question?
Right. So the book, you can go to our website, Moss Reports. That's one word, MossReports.com/Cancer Incorporated, or just Cancer Inc. INC. And then you'll have 2 options. One will be to download for free the PDF, the ebook of the book, exactly as the same as the printed version. The printed version you can order at quite a discount from the same website, and it'll be shipped to you from our warehouse. And so we want this to get out, obviously, as widely as possible. We think that this is the only way we're going to change the world around the cancer problem.
Yeah, it's got to go from the bottom up, not from the top down, because that's just
absolutely
not working.
That's our thinking.
Yes, sir. Kim from YouTube, what is the solution to the problems you outline, especially regarding clinical trials?
Right. And I want to acknowledge the help I had in writing this book. And this, when it came down to trying to propose some solutions, I had help from my good friend and colleague Wayne Jonas, who was the first director of the Office of Alternative Medicine at the National Institutes of Health, and has been very active, a remarkable career as a leader in the field of complementary medicine and medicine in general. He helped me very much with these recommendations. But basically, our idea is to make clinical trials representative of the overall patient population in the United States. So what do we mean by this? Well, the patients who are included. Well, let me step back and say clinical trials are the rock on which the whole medical system is built of new medicines, because you have to prove something by doing a clinical trial, especially like a randomized controlled trial, which is considered the top notch of all clinical testing. But what has gone on in the past few years is that the patients who are included in the clinical trials are cherry picked to be younger, healthier, and wealthier than the typical patient population in the United States. And also to be more likely to be Caucasian or white than to be minority people. And there's other ways in which they prejudice the results. So in other words, you can get maybe a positive result by choosing the patients in a way that they're unrepresentative of great many of the people who are affected by the disease. For instance, cancer is to a large degree a disease of older people. People over the age of 65 are about half the patient population. And people dying of cancer tend to be more like in their 70s. So, but many clinical trials have a cutoff point where they don't include people over 65 in the trial. So when you see the results of a drug in the patient population, it's quite less severe, less toxic than in the older population. This is just one of the ways in which this is done. We know that poor people die of cancer at a much quicker, faster pace and faster rate than do affluent people. So you have a prejudice there. And there are many ways that poor people, minority people, older people are excluded from the clinical trials. And this is not necessary. And Wayne Jonas and I really went through step by step. And we're just, by the way, repeating what many concerned doctors have said in lectures and papers over the years, that the clinical trial system is not representative of the actual real world patient population. And that makes the drugs appear far better than they really are. And they're not really appearing so great, but to the extent that they appear, that you could say that the drug is effective, what you really mean is it's effective in that narrow band of people who represent about 5% of the overall patient population in America. And if you included those other people, then you'd have to rule some of these drugs as being basically ineffective. Well, why would I want that? Because I want them to concentrate on drugs that are actually going to be effective for the people who have the actual disease, not for some cherry-picked slight selection of the patient population that gives them the best odds of getting approval for a drug that actually could harm the people who are getting it. So I think it's a principle that the clinical trial population has to mirror and represent the real world patients, the 85% of the American cancer patient population that receives their care in local community hospitals and in outpatient clinics. Only 15% of the patient population are going to these big, well-funded comprehensive cancer centers. So what happens, the 85% sort of get left behind, and the drugs may work for them or very likely may not work for them. But essentially that's a big part of our recommendations. Now, the most controversial recommendation is our recommendation that the government actually step in and nationalize the cancer drug business. And we say this, I mean, it hadn't even occurred to us until last summer. An article appeared in the Journal of the American Medical Association, either their oncology division or their internal medicine division, basically calling for the same thing. I don't think they use the word nationalized, but they talk about making it a common good, communal good. Well, this came from somebody who's actually in medical school, pretty amazing person in medical school, wrote this article that was in JAMA. But it made perfect sense to me, because I feel like when you look at the nature of this business, that there really isn't any room for profiteering off the misery of other people. In other words, I think, every society strikes a balance between private and social things, and some things should be kept in the social sphere. Like in my town, just about everything is of a social nature. We have the fire department is a volunteer fire department. We have no police department, but our county police is public. Our roads are public. Our town, and everything is public. And then, of course, there are businesses and so forth. So there's two spheres. But I think when it comes to something like cancer drugs, this is not something that has shown itself to be amenable to private enterprise, a private initiative. It really is a public good and should be dealt with as such, the same way that the fire department is, or the police department. So this was at least our thinking about it. We know that people will have different opinions about this, but we wanted to at least get that idea out there so we could spark a debate about this proposal.
Absolutely. But I just had this come in, sir. Brett from Facebook, isn't it too radical to actually nationalize the cancer drug industry?
Well, I don't think so. I think when you look at what has happened over the period of 40 years, the so-called entrepreneurial oncology, which is the model that we more or less operate under, has been a complete failure, because what we're getting are a plethora of ineffective drugs that basically are forced on us by the incredible profits generated by the pharmaceutical industry. Now, I don't think that's radical at all. I think that it is just basically the public asserting its right to control areas that are matters of public welfare instead of matters of profit making. This isn't like, it would be ridiculous for me to say we should take over the sports shoe business. It's not a matter of public necessity, or many other kinds of businesses. But here we're dealing with matters of life and death to the community. And I think this idea, there was no entrepreneurial oncology before the 1980s. It just that idea was considered to be quackery. And people said this, quite openly, quite freely. Not that there were many drugs available, but the idea that cancer, instead of being a private tragedy or an intellectual puzzle of the first order, that it should be a source of profit for companies, that's a new idea. I mean, I can remember very well, I've been in this field since the 1970s, but I remember when this idea was first floated in the 1970s and 1980s, and people were shocked at that idea. But we've become accustomed to the thought that cancer is a happy hunting ground for profit makers. And I don't think that need be the case. And I think eventually we will see certain big changes. Now, the biggest change that could be made in the short term would basically be to allow Medicare and the VA and other government agencies to negotiate on the price of these drugs. Because as I said, the profit ratio on Kymriah is, we know, because the inventor of the drug has told us, that the profit is basically 95% of the $475,000 per infusion. of the drug. So we know that there's absolute price gouging going on throughout this field. And some of these drugs are over $1 million now. So the treatment is over $1 million per patient. So I think there's enormous public acceptance of this idea. How you get that through the Congress that's already been thoroughly bribed and paid for, or how you get past the obstruction of the leaders of oncology, who also are many of whom are being bribed and paid for. Well, of course, this is the question of our time, but that it needs to be done, I have no doubt, and I don't think it's radical. I think it's going back to the very fundamental idea that the purpose of medicine is to get people better, to get them well, or to serve them well, and to relieve human suffering. So I don't think this is radical at all.
Thank you, sir. Sue from Facebook, what is your opinion on the increase of cancers in children and what is causing this?
Well, I haven't seen the data to show that cancer is increasing in children. You may be right. I'm not questioning it. I don't recall having seen that. Let me, if I could, Sue, let me talk about my feeling about the causes of cancer, and maybe this will help to answer your question. So the first big time identified cause of cancer, there were some environmental causes that were identified in the 18th century, like scrotal cancer and chimney sweeps. That was already known and published 200 or 300 years ago. But the first major cause of cancer was, of course, tobacco. And most people think that tobacco was identified as a cause of lung cancer and other cancers in the 1960s. If you're old enough, you probably remember the Surgeon General Terry's report from 1964 that had clearly identified smoking as the main cause for lung cancer. But in fact, that link between tobacco and cancer goes back much earlier than that. In fact, King James, the one who supervised the translation of the Bible into English, the King James version of the Bible, in the early 17th century, he wrote a pamphlet about tobacco in which he referred to tumors in the body as being caused by tobacco. So I thought that was very interesting. And then I found an article from a Dr. Abbey on 100 cases of cancer of the mouth, which clearly identifies tobacco as the cause of that. And so I think that was in 1912. So I think in the 50s, my late friend Ernst Winder did studies at Sloan Kettering in which he showed the absolutely at every level how tobacco caused cancer. So we knew that we had a major cause of cancer in our hands, as it were. And that knowledge was basically suppressed for 25 years because when they launched the war on cancer, they left out one important thing, which was that tobacco was already the major known cause of cancer. And then, of course, secondhand smoke and thirdhand smoke came into the picture. So we have a much fuller picture of this. But this was only a secret because the leadership of the cancer field suppressed the knowledge of this for decades. So what do we know about cancer is there are certain carcinogens, there are certain elements in the environment that are irritants or destroy the genome or alter the genome or the mitochondria, the energy generating portion of the cell. And then this predisposes the cancer to come out, which doesn't mean that there's no link between genetics and cancer, but it's relatively minor compared to, let's say, something like tobacco. So when I look at the question of the incidence of cancer, like we had another report just recently that the cancer deaths had gone down. Well, yes, that's true. The major reason for that is because people, especially young people are smoking at much lower rates than their parents or their grandparents were. So thankfully, after 10, 15, 20 years, you start to see further decline in the cancer death rate, which is great. But that was through no help from the National Cancer Institute, from the War on Cancer. I mean, they actually decreased their focus on tobacco and carcinogens as the years went by. I had a wonderful friend who's just passed away not long ago named Samuel Epstein. And Samuel Epstein was a professor at the University of Illinois who wrote a book called The Politics of Cancer. And what he was referring to wasn't even about tobacco. It was how many carcinogens are in the environment that were ignored, where these things, where there's abundant evidence for their causing cancer, and yet this was ignored. And so I think I would first of all be looking at, at that situation, like what is it in the environment in terms of the carcinogens that's causing increases in cancer or persistence in cancer.
Thank you, sir. Norton from Facebook. I believe there has been a cure for over 20 years, but the government and big pharma will never release it. What do you think, sir?
So this is a very interesting question. I doubt if there is a cure for cancer. Yeah, it could be, but it would be something either that hasn't been discovered yet or that we're just seriously overlooking. Because I've been in this field for 45 years. I've heard this argument for 45 years. But the item that gets identified as the cure for cancer changes like every year or two. So I think if put in those stark terms, I don't agree. But on the other hand, it hardly needs arguing that innumerable treatments that showed promise have been ignored or opposed by the medical leadership. And we had Laetrile, for instance, in the 1970s and part of the 1980s. It was a derivative of apricot kernels. And there was evidence, as I've written, I wrote a whole book about this called Doctored Results. There was evidence at Sloan Kettering of some effectiveness and considerable effectiveness in animal studies using Laetrile or amygdalin, and that was brutally suppressed. And again, I wrote a whole book. Of my whole career was sort of wrapped up in the early days of that question. But you could not say Laetrile was the cure for cancer. It simply does not function. It never was intended to function like that. In order for us to make a claim that something is a cure for cancer, we would have to have proof of that. And I don't say that just to be difficult. I mean, you need if you're going to make a claim of such a extraordinary nature, you have to have a solid foundation for saying that. So there are many things that show enormous promise in cancer, but don't get developed. And in my book, Cancer Incorporated, I give 3 examples of that. And one of them is the metabolic theory, or the metabolic therapy, if you will. And I give the evidence for the effectiveness of this. And here too, I had help in my framing of this, from Professor Thomas Seyfried of Boston College, who helped me greatly in that chapter. I talk about Coley's toxins. Coley's toxins was an early form of fever therapy, bacterial byproducts that cause fever and chills in people. And so I give a lot of details about this and show how extraordinarily effective the Coley's toxins of 100 years ago seemed to be, based upon meticulous record keeping, not on rumor, but on meticulous record keeping by Dr. Coley's daughter, Helen Coley Nortz. So that was a second treatment that I deal with in Cancer Incorporated. And then I also talk about a kind of low-dose immune therapy that's practiced in Europe. And that is showing a great deal of promise with far less in the way of side effects from standard immune therapy, which is actually very toxic. So that's that. To that extent, I totally agree with the caller, but I wouldn't frame it in such terms as saying that the government knows of the cure for cancer. I don't believe that's true. I don't think that's sustainable. But I do think that they have suppressed many treatments that show a great deal of promise. And some people call this the valley of death, meaning you can develop, let's say you have a food supplement and it's showing promise against cancer, and you go up to a certain point. Let's say you do all the laboratory work. You might even do like a phase one a pilot study or a phase one clinical trial, and then the money runs out, and because it's a natural product, there's no interest on the part of pharma in terms of developing this, and so it just dies. They call that the valley of death. So I think it's there's some truth in what the caller said, but I wouldn't put it just in terms of like the government knows the cure, because I don't think there is a single cure.
All right, sir. We have one more question here. And this question is Casey from Facebook. Dr. Moss, do you ever feel worried for your life? And I would just like to say thank you for your bravery.
Well, thank you. When I was at Sloan Kettering, I uncovered the positive data on Laetrile that Dr. Kanematsu Sugiura had performed in his experiments in the 1970s, and he gave me a copy of his lab notes. And in 1977, I stood up at a press conference that I called at the Hilton Hotel in New York City, and basically denounced my own employer and said that they were covering up this positive information while saying that Laetrile was ineffective. And in fact, it was in the laboratory, it was quite effective. So I didn't know what to expect for doing that. And I had some hard times, but I felt that I was safer hiding in plain sight, as it were, if that makes any sense. So in other words, when you become a public figure, to a certain extent, I certainly was a public figure because I had entered into this very controversial area. You're better off to be in full view than to be a very obscure person who then might face some horrible fate, and no one would ever know why it was. You got gunned down in the middle of the night in a so-called botched robbery or something like that. So yes, of course, one could still run into trouble, but I think it's no way to live if you know something of tremendous consequence to so many millions of people, and you know this, and you don't come out with it because of fear for your own personal safety. Well, I think that's not a good thing. That's a little bit too selfish for my taste. So I don't worry about it. What will be, and I just feel like I just want to get the word out about this to as many people as possible, and that would be my contribution.
Thank you so much, sir. And I truly believe that the gentleman was absolutely correct in talking about bravery, but it's not just that. It's all your passion and all your dedication. What would you like to leave our audience with? But first, can you tell them again where to get the PDF, where to get the book, and maybe what else you're up to and anything else that you'd like them to know about what's going on with you or your business before we move on, sir?
So to get the book Cancer Incorporated, you go to mossreports.com/Cancer Incorporated, or just Cancer Inc. INC, and you'll have a choice of getting a download, a free ebook or PDF of the book. Same book is available at a relatively low cost paperback, which will be then sent to you by our distributor. And we'd love to have you come on board in terms of, relating, and we'd love to hear your comments about the book. What else are we doing? Well, at Moss Reports, we basically produce 38 disease specific or diagnosis specific reports on the 38 most common forms of cancer, which covers, I figured this out once, but it's somewhere between 92 and 95% of all the cancers are covered in our Moss reports. So these are updated periodically. We work on this all year long, and we keep this up to date. And we're totally independent of all other outside influences. We operate with neither fear nor favor towards any treatment, conventional or alternative. We go around the world, either I personally or my team, and visit clinics and assess to whatever extent we can, assess their treatments. So we are an independent source of information, of unvarnished information on treatments, conventional, complementary, and alternative. And that's our business, basically. The Moss Reports is our core business. There's a charge for those reports because we are totally independent. This is how we support ourselves, is through the sale of these reports. And I also do some phone consultations. If we all feel it's a good match for me to do that, then we can talk about individuals' treatment options. If they need further guidance from after, all that they've read, especially if they've read our Moss report on their particular diagnosis, or if we don't have a Moss report on their particular diagnosis, oftentimes we'll do a phone consultation on their situation. So those are two other things. We are in the midst of producing a documentary film on the topic of cancer and immunology or immunotherapy. And the film is going to be based around the links between certain historic treatments for cancer that had an immunological nature to them and modern day immunotherapy, such as the kind that James Allison won the Nobel Prize for 2 years ago. So we're very interested in the natural approach in the sense of mobilizing the immune system. We think this is the key to controlling cancer. And I continue to produce blogs. I have one right now about the coronavirus and how it impacts cancer patients, and put out, we have a Facebook page and a YouTube channel. So we're very active, and I'm in business with my son, Ben, and also my grandson, Jacob. So we're 3 generations of Mosses working on this project.
There it is, the family blessing, the Moss family blessing. Thank you so much, Dr. Ralph Moss, for joining me today on the show. And I guess I'll be seeing you in Markham in April the 30th. We're going to be there for 4 days. Dr. Moss is going to be having 2 lectures. I'll be doing about 4 lectures, but we'll both be on the panel on the last day. Can you tell people what your lectures are about in Markham, sir? At the Legends of...
I'm not, I think it will cover in greater detail some of the things we talked about today, and especially the immunological question, like what were the treatments that worked in the old days, why were they suppressed, and what is working today.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining me, sir. It's been a real pleasure, and I know you're really busy, so thank you for taking the time. God bless.
You're quite welcome. As always, a pleasure.
Thank you, sir. For everyone watching, you can join me next Monday, at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for Doc Talk Live Q&A. Also that week, on Wednesday, March 18th at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, you can join me with Larry Langdon to learn about PEMF and the sentient element. But hey, it's more than that. I believe that the sentient element is the most powerful PEMF today. And it's actually an energy medicine device that you can use your own phone, and you can put on any frequency to go after any viral, bacterial, fungal, or any condition, even a migraine, or anything like lupus. Or you could do a blood sweep on your body, and you can do things to actually go in there and create that calm and peace in that frequency, because everything boils down to a frequency. It doesn't matter what you're talking about in life, what you eat, what you drink, what you think, it's all about frequency. So you're not going to want to miss that. I'm also going to be doing that on, and then I'll be having him come back and we'll be doing an actual Q&A on the Thursday. So on Wednesday, next Wednesday, we'll be doing it about PEMF and helping to go in and combat viral, bacterial, fungal, and other situations in the human body. Don't forget, everyone, every Monday you can join me for Doc Talk live Q&A like I'll be doing this Monday, okay? And remember something, you'll see us on YouTube, Facebook, and also I'll be posting on Instagram. When watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe below and make sure you click on the bell to enable notifications so that you never miss a show. And understand something, all our Q&As are timestamped. So every question that was asked of Dr. Ralph Moss today is actually going to be on there. You can go right to the question, get the answer, so that, you know what, let's be efficient, right? Efficient with our time, efficient with your time. Also, if you wish to listen to our audio version of any of our shows, you can find them on iTunes, Spotify, and SoundCloud. Again, thank you, Dr. Ralph Moss, and all my listeners who make this show even possible. And you know what? I'm going to tell you something. It is teamwork that makes the dream work. And did you hear what Dr. Moss said? Okay, we need to work from the ground up because it's not working from the top down. God bless everyone. And remember something. Never forget, 3, 2, 1, you got this. God bless, and have the best weekend of your life. If you're looking for life-saving and life-changing information, well, you've come to the right place. Don't forget to click and subscribe. Stay connected.